All right, let's talk about one of the most chaotic, absolutely world-changing events in history, the French Revolution. And believe me, this was way more than just a rebellion. We're talking about the complete teardown of a society that had stood for centuries. It basically redefined everything we thought we knew about power, rights, and what it even means to be a citizen.
And this quote here from Alexis de Tocqueville, man, it just nails it. A revolution which was social as much as political. What he's saying is, this wasn't just about politics, swapping out one leader for another. No, this was about tearing up the entire social rulebook, from the super rich nobles all the way down to the poorest farmers. Okay, so if we want to understand how this whole thing exploded, we've got to look at the powder keg it was sitting on, and that was pre-revolutionary France, a system called the Ancien Régime, basically the old regime. And let me tell you, this society was just teetering on the edge, ready to fall apart. And who was at the very top of this shaky structure? King Louis XVI. Now, his power wasn't just political, it was seen as God-given. So try to picture this. You've got a leader with zero checks and balances, no constitution, no real parliament to tell him no. Whatever he said went. His word was literally law. So this whole society was split into three groups. They called them estates. And just look at that chart. It's insane. You've got the first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility, and then there's the third estate, 97% of the entire country. That's pretty much everyone else, from bankers to bakers to farmers, all crammed into one group.
And this is where the system gets just fundamentally unfair. That top 3%, the clergy and the nobles, they had it all. They owned most of the land, they got all the best jobs, and the craziest part, they paid basically zero taxes. So who was paying for everything? You guessed it, that massive 97%, the third estate. They were carrying the entire country on their backs.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the economy was an absolute train wreck. The government was completely broke from fighting all these expensive wars. And get this, one of those wars was the American Revolution. So ironically, they helped create a new republic, and their soldiers came home with all these radical ideas about freedom while their own country was falling apart. The royals are living it up, and meanwhile, the price of bread, the one thing most people could afford to eat, is going through the roof. And what's the king's brilliant solution? You guessed it. Tax the third estate even more.
So let's recap. You've got a deeply unfair society, a government with no money, and people who are literally starving. That powder keg we talked about, it's about to blow. And 1789 is the year the match gets lit.
And once things started happening, they happened fast. I mean, just look at this timeline. In May, the king finally calls a big meeting to figure things out. By June, the third estate has had enough and just walks out, basically saying, we are the government now. A month later, in July, the people of Paris storm the Bastille prison, this huge symbol of the king's power. And by August, boom, the old world is gone.
Out of that chaos comes this incredible document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And this thing was a total bombshell. It took all these ideas from the big thinkers of the day and said, you know what? Your rights don't come from a king. They don't even come from God. You're just born with them. It was a complete and total attack on everything the old regime stood for. So for a little while, there's this amazing sense of hope, right? All this talk of liberty and equality. But it doesn't last. The revolution is about to take a really sharp, really dark, and really bloody turn. You know, the famous motto of the revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity. But as things get more chaotic, France is at war, it has enemies on all sides, a brand new, terrifying question starts to emerge. Can you only save a revolution through fear? And the revolutionaries, they went all in. In 1792, they just got rid of the monarchy completely, declared France a republic. And then, in early 1793, they do the unthinkable. They execute their own king, Louis XVI, in public with the guillotine. I mean, this sent shockwaves through every royal court in Europe.
And that act kicks off the most infamous chapter of all, the Reign of Terror. A guy named Maximilien Robespierre takes charge, and the new government's motto is basically, terror is the order of the day. They set up these special courts to hunt down anyone they considered an enemy of the revolution. This led to just thousands and thousands of executions, all done with that new, terrifyingly efficient machine, the guillotine.
But here's the thing about a government built on fear, it can't last. The paranoia just spins out of control, and pretty soon the revolution starts eating its own.
all this bloodshed, it leaves a huge power vacuum, and the people of France are just exhausted. They're desperate for some kind of stability. And that desperation is what sets the stage for one of the most famous men in history.
So let's just walk through how this happens. First, in 1794, Robespierre, the leader of the Terror, ends up at the guillotine himself. Poetic justice, right? That ends the Terror. But the government that replaces him, called the Directory, is super weak and corrupt. France just stumbles from one crisis to the next for a few years. And then, in 1799, this brilliant, super ambitious young general, Napoleon Bonaparte, decides he's had enough and he just takes over.
And just like that, with Napoleon's coup, a decade of chaos comes to a hard stop. The French Revolution, the event itself, was officially over. But the ideas it unleashed, oh, they were just getting started. So you might be thinking, why do we care so much about something that happened over 200 years ago? Well, because the ideas that came out of this revolution, things like liberty, nationalism, the idea that people should rule themselves, they didn't just stay in France. They spread like wildfire across the entire world.
I mean, the legacy is just enormous. Let's break it down. Politically, it was the death knell for kings ruling with absolute power, and it gave rise to the idea of the nation-state. Socially, it completely wiped out the old feudal system and introduced the idea that everyone should be equal before the law. And globally, wow, it inspired revolutions and independence movements everywhere, from Latin America all the way to Haiti for the next 100 years.
Look, if you remember just one thing from all this, make it this. The biggest change was about identity. It took people who were just seen as subjects, who belonged to a king, and it turned them into citizens who belonged to a nation. It flipped the whole script, saying power comes from the people, not just because you were born into the right family. And so that leaves us with one last big question. The promise of the revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity for everyone. But when you look at the world today, with all the ongoing fights for basic rights and for justice, you have to wonder, has that promise really been fulfilled yet?